A policeman and a killer actually joined forces to confront an entire organization of killers. Even the god of luck was on their side. However, the members of the killer organization are well trained. It is no easy task to survive at their hands. But why did the policeman and the killer come together? And why did the woman betray the organization? It all starts with an ordinary mission. Not long ago, Detective Nick and his partner Jakes were squatting on the street watching closely. They saw the suspect Ian wandering out and started the car to go after him. Unexpectedly, Ian shot Jax and turned around to drive away. But Nick is a sharpshooter and hit the moving target with one shot. The car rolled over several times. Nick saw no one in the car and took off in pursuit. When it comes to running, his talent is evident here. And Ian couldn't shake him off. Seeing that he was about to be caught, he grabbed a passerby as a hostage. Unexpectedly, this passerby was a martial artist, and an elbow strike made Ian roll his eyes. People nearby immediately pounced on him and pinned him to the ground. During the scuffle, Ian shot and injured someone, then tried to grab a child as a shield. In the end, Nick shot him through the neck, and his body fell into the moat. On the other side, the female lead is the top assassin of a top-notch assassin agency. A few days ago, she took on a new job from an intermediary, which was to kill the employer's sworn enemy. She entered a private tailor shop, and from the familiar way she interacted with the shopkeeper, it was clear they were old friends. She held the shopkeeper's injured hand, and asked if those troublemakers would come back. The old man looked at her and smiled, asking how she had driven them away. She raised her eyebrows and said, of course, by reasoning with them. Then the old man handed over a suit of clothes. On that rainy night, Helen put on this outfit and went to a dance hall, easily sneaking in. With a glance, she locked onto the target drinking in the booth. At this time, a girl in white was singing on the stage. Soon, a man came up to strike up a conversation. Helen gave him a seductive look, and the man drove all irrelevant people out. The singing girl sent a message to someone named Ian, but there was no response on the phone. Later, she learned from a friend that Ian had long been dead, and the man didn't expect this news to be his death warrant. Helen took out a weapon from the strap on her back, and clicked it together. Then she stabbed the man several times. Seeing others trying to run, Helen slid over in pursuit, stabbed one to death and seized his pistol. She took advantage of the situation to take down another small fry. The bartender raised a shotgun and was about to pull the trigger, when Helen threw a flying knife and killed him instantly. Then she kicked the man flying. She picked up the shotgun and tried to get out from behind the bar, but a thug grabbed the barrel. Helen stepped forward and punched the man in the throat, taking advantage of the situation to disarm him. She then pulled off the necklace around her neck, which turned out to be a blade. Helen stabbed him with it. Unexpectedly, the man who was first attacked wasn't dead. Instead, he picked up a pistol and prepared to sneak attack. Helen grabbed a pistol and shot him in the head. The singing girl was so frightened by the commotion that she hit her head on the steps, and suddenly everything went black and she couldn't see anything. The only one left breathing in the room was this girl. Helen pointed the gun at her finger not moving on the trigger. When she heard the girl say she couldn't see, Helen put away the gun and let her go. Little did she know that this act would bring her great trouble. Helen returned to the stronghold, and the middleman Finn chased after her. Finn asked why that girl was still alive. Helen argued that she couldn't see anything and couldn't remember her appearance. Finn said, "There's no such thing as luck in a killer's dictionary." Originally, this girl was named Jennifer and was a singer. She happened to be performing as a resident singer at the club that night. On the other side, Nick was called in by his superior for questioning because he killed Ian. Nick said the suspect had injured a policeman and taken a child hostage. Why on earth couldn't he shoot? Nick was tired of the nonsense, slammed the door, and went to find his subordinate Wes. Europol officer Sydney also got involved in this case. Wes reported that Ian had been messaging a girl before being chased. That girl replied that she was writing a song for him. The song playing in Ian's headphones was sung by a female singer. It couldn't be found online, and it seemed to be a demo tape. Moreover, the Marseille gang was wiped out last night, and only Jennifer survived. The song in Ian's headphones was sung by her. Sydney added that among those killed, one died from a gunshot, 4 were stabbed. Judging from the wounds, it must have been a samurai sword that was used. Nick muttered, "Can someone really carry a samurai sword into a club, and even use it to take down gun-wielding gangsters?" On this side, Helen forged a fake ID card. The position written on it was Vice Consul of the U.S. Embassy. The next day, she disguised herself and came to the hospital. The policeman glanced at the ID and immediately let her in. After entering the ward, she said she was from the embassy, but her hand injected a highly toxic substance into the 4 bottle. She pretended to casually ask how her eyes were. She learned that Jennifer had nerve swelling. It was uncertain whether the blindness was temporary or permanent. At this moment, Helen was about to leave, but Jennifer begged her to help call her mother, saying she was afraid her mother would worry. These words softened Helen's heart again. she walked over and turned off the 4 regulator. At this time, Nick also came to the ward to investigate. Helen had to pretend to be from the embassy and stay in the room. Nick asked Jennifer what the killer looked like. Helen quietly pulled out her gun. Jennifer said there must have been something in the drink she had that night. She couldn't remember anything about what happened then. Only then did Helen put the gun away again. At this moment, the nurse came in to make rounds and turned on the regulator. Helen watched with her heart in her throat. Nick asked about Ian again. Jennifer still said she didn't know, seeing that the highly toxic substance was about to be infused into Jennifer's body. Helen suddenly stood up and knocked over the 4 bottle. Nick concluded that Jennifer was lying and must be hiding something. The two of them left the hospital together. After chatting casually for a few words, Helen had just walked away. Nick's phone rang. The U.S. Embassy said they had never heard of this vice consul named Norn. Nick hung up the phone. Helen had long since disappeared. He took out his notebook and drew a circle around that fake name. On the other side, Goebel came to settle accounts with Finn. Losing 75 million euros for no reason made him very angry. Originally, he had been hanging around with the Saudi prince, but the prince had his pocket money cut off by his father. At the beginning, the batch of drugs the prince paid for was worth 75 million. It could be sold for 300 million on the black market. It was robbed. Now the prince wants to go home and has to meet with French police. That policeman is exactly Nick. This man is capable and tough, and has become a thorn in Goebel's side. At this moment, Nick quietly made his way to the hotel where the Saudi prince was staying. This prince was indeed wealthy. To live comfortably, he bought the entire luxury hotel. The prince was eager to go home to argue with his father, but his plane was being held by the French police. Nick said he would return the plane to him after asking a few questions. A few days ago, the Saudi prince's plane landed on time at Bourget Airport at 4:30 p.m. But just as he was about to leave Beirut, he was stopped by a group of gangsters posing as French customs officers. These men immediately started robbing the items on the plane, and among them was Sergei. Nick interrogated the prince, asking if he knew those robbers. The prince shook his head in denial. When asked what was on the plane, the prince said there was nothing. Nick directly pulled out a photo of Goebel, saying this man was a local tyrant in Paris, involved in gambling, pimping, and drug trafficking, and had done many immoral things. Instead, the prince said that people always have to make a living. He was in a hurry to leave, and Nick pressed him on what exactly the gangsters had stolen. The prince avoided the question and instead said he was a Saudi prince, and demanded that his plane be returned immediately. Meanwhile, Helen went to see Finn, and caught sight of an Asian girl out of the corner of her eye. Finn explained that this was a new recruit, Kimmy, who was replacing the deceased Rudy, and admired Helen greatly. As he spoke, Finn asked why that girl was still alive. Helen argued that the police chief had come to interfere, and that the woman knew nothing, not even what the killer looked like. Finn exposed her, saying she was lying, and Helen had a change of heart. Fortunately, she hadn't said anything improper. Seeing that Helen hesitated to act, Finn played on her emotions, saying she had forgotten who had pulled her out of the mire back then. He said they were the same kind, all outsiders, and outsiders were never trapped. The rules inside didn't apply to them. After saying that, he told her to continue with her work. Nick went to visit his partner Jax and secretly tucked a bottle of wine under his arm. During their chat, they revealed that the batch of drugs they were investigating was hidden on the prince's plane. Then Helen put on a nurse's uniform and went to kill Jennifer. Upon entering the ward, she went up to the girl, and said that regarding the club incident that night, someone was trying to kill her to silence her, and if she wanted to live, she should listen to her. After the girl nodded, Helen first knocked out the policeman at the door, then pushed Jennifer and slipped out. But two killers had already stormed into the hospital, shooting at anyone they saw. Nick heard the gunshots and immediately ran over. Helen told the girl to be quiet, took out her gun, attached a silencer, lay down on the ground, and fired a shot, triggering the alarm. Then she pushed the girl back. Nick confronted a killer, first escorted a nurse to run away, then turned around and fired. Unfortunately, the killer was wearing a bulletproof vest, and acted as if nothing had happened. Taking advantage of the standoff between the two, Helen shot and exploded a fire extinguisher. In the white haze, Nick pounced and took down the killer with a back throw. The two exchanged a glance, and Helen pushed the girl to continue running. Nick easily dislocated the killer's arm and threw him into the next room. Helen dragged Jennifer to the laboratory. Just as she stood steady, she felt movement behind her. Nick had caught up. The two aimed their guns at each other, with the girl in the middle, dumbfounded like a wooden stake. Nick understood. She was protecting this girl. At this moment, two more killers emerged. Helen and the detective each took on one, taking them down almost simultaneously. Turning back, they were once again in a standoff with guns raised. Nick's gun was empty, but Helen always kept one bullet. She knocked Nick down with a punch. As she was leaving, she felt something was wrong, so she turned back to warn the detective. She knew he was still awake.
I'm sorry too.
Afterwards, Helen pushed Jennifer to escape and hid her in her own secret hideout. Early the next morning, the prince and Goebel met, and an argument broke out as soon as they saw each other. It turned out that Nick had taken out photos of Goebel entering the prince's hotel. Goebel was furious and said that if he had problems, he could go home, but he had no way out. He had lost 75 million euros in this deal, and was planning to find a scapegoat to deter those with ill intentions from acting up. Seeing the prince didn't care at all, Goebel suddenly reached for a vital part of the prince. The bodyguard was about to step forward. When Goebel picked up a fork and stabbed him several times, it was only because Finn quickly pulled him away that no one was killed. Then Goebel shouted at Finn, telling Helen to take out the Saudi prince. At this time, Helen was chatting with Jennifer, and said a sentence she had used at the club that night. The girl sensed something was wrong, and realized Helen was the killer at the club that night. Helen took the opportunity to tell all the truth, then questioned Jennifer why those killers were after her. There must be a reason for it. Jennifer finally told the truth, saying that the people at the club had stolen drugs from a private jet, and Ian was part of the group. She hid in the car watching them handle the goods, and she was hiding there because she was helping Ian open the warehouse door. It turned out that Ian and Jennifer had stolen that batch of drugs, and hidden them in a warehouse in a district of Paris. Helen was stunned when she heard this. It was really as Finn had said. There were no civilians in the room that night, and this girl was no innocent either. So she dragged her to a church, pulled out a gun, and told her to sing, but her finger froze on the trigger, and she hesitated. When Finn arrived, Helen lied that she had dealt with the girl. Finn stared at her for a long time, didn't mention killing the prince, and was instead happy that Helen's toughness had returned. But in fact, she had hidden Jennifer in the confessional. Helen spared her, because Jennifer looked too much like her younger sister who had died young. At this time, Nick was called in by his superior for a scolding. Because of the shooting in the hospital, he said the prince was suspicious, as drug-sniffing dogs had detected a scent on his plane. The superior didn't believe him. Nick raised his voice even more, saying it was 100 kilograms of drugs, worth a sky-high 350 million euros, and they had been watching him for months. But the superior just waved him away, saying France had just bought billions of euros worth of oil from Saudi Arabia, and they had spent the same amount on French arms. Asking if he wanted to ruin the deal, Nick stormed out in anger, but his drive to investigate only grew stronger. He checked the surveillance footage, and not only saw Helen disguised as the vice-consul, but also found she kept going to a fast food restaurant to order takeout every day. That day, Helen had just left the fast food restaurant when Nick, who had been waiting, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a business card-sized newspaper filled with English crossword puzzles. Nick took her back to the police station. They started chatting casually. After Helen finished the crossword, Nick said he'd been shot 4 years ago, during a deal with drug dealers, with his partner taking time to arrive, and asked what she would do in that situation. Helen replied she'd chat aimlessly with the dealers to distract them. Then, as if they'd rehearsed, they said in unison, "What size shoes do you wear?" It was with this trick that Nick had survived back then, and the one who saved him was none other than Helen. The drug dealer was her target. He stared at Helen and asked where that girl was. Helen said that if he returned the crossword puzzle to her, she could take the detective to find Jennifer. Just after walking out of the police station door, Helen used the keys from a police officer to unlock the handcuffs. Then she grabbed the nearby advertising banner, leapt down, and landed on the ground floor, slipping away right in front of the police. Nick watched her run away and actually chuckled, as if he had guessed it earlier. Over here, Goebel was busy hosting a banquet, and Finn leaned over. Goebel asked why Helen hadn't acted yet, but Finn's attention wasn't on this. His eyes stared fixedly at somewhere else. To be precise, it was on a glass of wine until the glass was brought to Goebel. Goebel had just grasped the wine glass, when the waiter beside him suddenly pulled out a gun, and shot him with a bang. This waiter was exactly Kimmy, Helen's fan. Obviously, this scene was all staged by Finn. After all, he had someone steal that batch of drugs, and it had nothing to do with the Saudi prince. On the other side, when Helen returned home, the house was already empty. Jennifer was nowhere to be seen, and even the fish tank had been knocked over. She threw the fish back into the water. Checking the surveillance footage, she saw 2 strong men carry Jennifer away. Helen was anxious when Finn sent a text message to arrange a meeting. On Nick's side, his subordinate handed over several photos, all of which were moles in the police station. He rushed back to the office and found these corrupt police officers gathered around his desk, messing around. They even took out 2 bags of drugs. Nick turned around and ran, and the corrupt police officers chased after him. Nick tried to follow Helen's example and jump over the advertising banner, but slipped with his hand halfway and fell to the ground with a thud. Fortunately, he was strong enough to get up and escape from the building. On the other side, Helen went to meet Finn, and he gave her one last mission. As long as she killed Nick, he would let Helen and Jennifer go. Helen had to go to the designated location to lie in ambush, but Kimmy had already hidden, holding a gun and waiting for the signal. As soon as Helen pulled the trigger, she would immediately shoot Helen. At this time, Nick arrived at the marketplace, but the contact coming towards him turned out to be Jax. Helen dialed the corrupt police officer's number, and the one answering the call was indeed Jax. This was really walking right into the trap. Helen's voice was extremely cold, saying that Nick trusted him so much, yet he wanted to be an ungrateful person. Then she told him to pass the phone to Nick, otherwise he would definitely die. Nick had just put the phone to his ear when Helen pulled the trigger, and the bullet hit Jax in the abdomen. Kimmy heard the gunshot, raised her hand and fired, but unexpectedly hit a dummy. When she reacted and looked for Helen, the other party had already aimed her gun. The next second, Kimmy was killed in return. Nick took the phone and finally realized that Jax had betrayed him. He snarled, telling him to say where the drugs were hidden and where Jennifer was. After that, Helen and Nick became temporary partners. Jax was thrown in the back seat and refused to reveal any information. Nick suddenly swerved the car, and Jax almost fainted from pain before revealing the location of the drug warehouse. Then Nick dropped the man off at the hospital entrance, took Helen, and rushed straight to the secret location. At this point, Nick was stunned. The two rushed into the warehouse, hopped into the loading truck, and took off. Helen called Finn and said he had set a trap to get her. Finn retorted confidently, saying she deserved this for betraying him. Moreover, he now had a new killer. Helen said that if Jennifer wasn't released, she would drive this truck full of drugs around the streets. Finn was really anxious now. Helen slipped into the church with a gun, as usual, rambling a few words to the cross. Soon, Finn arrived with a group of killers. As soon as he stepped in, Helen's gun was pressed against his forehead. Finn took out his phone, and on the screen was Jennifer with a gun to her head. This trick was really ruthless. Outside, Nick secretly planted a bomb in the car and pulled the fuse. Helen kicked Finn away, rushed out, and shot at the tombstone. The rising sun blinded the female killer's eyes. She fired wildly like she was blind, yet unexpectedly hit Jennifer. Helen took care of the motorcycling killer and rushed to the girl, but other killers surrounded them again, and they were about to be done for. Nick drove into the garden, picked up a submachine gun, and mowed down a group. Finn emerged and shot out the car's tire. Nick reached Helen's side. Seeing the gangsters approaching the car, he raised his hand and pressed the bomb switch. With a loud boom, the entire truckload of goods was destroyed. The two took the opportunity to slip into the church and fired back to back. The corrupt police were knocked down as soon as they stepped in. A flock of white doves flew past Nick's ear. He subconsciously turned his head, just in time to dodge a fatal shot, but there were no bullets left in the gun. He grabbed the gun barrel and smashed it onto Finn with a clang, then pinned him against a pillar and grappled. Nick grabbed the other's neck but was grabbed by the eye by Finn, making him howl in pain. He picked up Finn and smashed him hard to the ground. Helen's gun was kicked away by the female killer. The two grappled, neither giving in, rolling around together. Helen clamped the female killer's waist with her legs. After being thrown off, she kicked back and sent the other's gun flying, but she was pinned to the ground during the struggle. Seeing the female killer's knife stab forward, Helen struggled to hold it back, kicked her away, and finally caught her breath. Before she could catch her breath, another enemy burst in with a gun. Nick tried to grab the gun and took a shot to the stomach. On the other side of the church, Jennifer, hearing his screams, suddenly saw a burst of light in front of her eyes and could actually see. The fight continued. Nick had just taken down two enemies when Finn attacked him from behind. Helen was stuck in a deadly struggle with the female killer and couldn't break free. Finn pulled out a knife and stabbed Nick in the stomach. Helen, seeing this, panicked. She leapt off a chair, stepped on Nick's back, mounted Finn's shoulders, and lifted her hand to shoot the enemy beside them dead. But just as she was about to finish Finn off with another shot, she was interrupted by the female killer. Nick crawled to the backpack and feel for a gun. Helen and the female killer grappled again. She grabbed the other's braid and yanked hard. The female killer's neck broke, and she fell down, motionless. Helen had just relaxed when a sudden pain in her chest. Finn, not yet dead, had fired a shot. She gave a bitter smile, turned to stare at Finn, and blurted out, "What size shoes do you wear?" Nick instantly got the signal. He slid his gun over. Helen picked up the gun and killed Finn. The way he fell was like the statue he prayed to every day. Finally, Helen blew out the candles in the church, turned, and walked out of the mess. The old tailor from the shop sewed up her wound. Threading the needle, he said, "Come learn to make clothes with me." A few days later, Helen looked through a scope, watching Jennifer rush into her mother's arms, but there was no gun in her hand. On the other side, Nick was lying in a hospital bed recovering from his injuries. His superior came in and wanted to transfer him to another department. He said slowly, "About the Saudi prince dealing drugs. Do you want the whole of France to know about it?" The superior changed his tune and said he could return to his original post. As soon as the superior left, Nick pulled out a phone from his lunch. It was Helen calling. She said she had found a new job, and would send Nick a postcard once things settled down. Nick picked up the crossword puzzle on the table. The last word was rebirth. Helen laughed out loud on the other end of the phone. She hung up. tore off the scarf around her neck. And from today on, she was a brand new self. The story ends. Here, the gunfights and the killer are intense and frequent, but go far beyond superficial excitement. John Woo has special intentions behind his handling of gunfights, the white doves in the church, the glass pierced by bullets, the coordination of the two shooting back to back. These scene designs are not just for visual effects, but more to show a special way of communication. Helen is such an incompetent killer. She wields a knife skillfully in the dance hall, yet can't bring herself to harm. The blind Jennifer, she injects poison into the 4 bottle without blinking, but her hand softens when she hears the girl wants to call her mother. The blade in her necklace can kill, but can also, in a moment, remind her that she once needed protection too. Nick isn't a standard hero. He argues with his superiors, chases criminals like a mad dog, and the pain in his eyes when he finds his partner is a mole hurts more than being shot. When he staked out the fast food restaurant to catch Helen, the look in his eyes as he held that crossword paper clearly showed he recognized a kindred spirit. Both have been worn down by rules, yet still hold on to unyielding principles. Their tacit understanding is the most interesting. Shooting back to back in the church, Nick turning his head to dodge a bullet as white doves fly by, Helen stepping on his back to pounce on the enemy, smooth as if rehearsed. A policeman and a killer, who should have aimed guns at each other, became temporary partners. In tracking down the mole, when Helen asked Finn, "What size shoes do you wear?" Nick immediately passed her the gun. Some tacit understanding transcends identities. The film's ferocity lies in the details. Finn uses Jennifer as a hostage, with calculation in his eyes colder than a gun's muzzle. Jax betrays Nick but clenches his teeth and won't talk, knowing talking would only bring a worse end. There's no absolute good or evil. Helen kills many but protects the unclean girl. Finn falls under the cross like a joke, praying to God every day yet failing at the hands of the soft-heartedness he looks down on. This video ends here. If you have other insights, feel free to leave a comment in the comments section. See you next time.